Good afternoon, colleagues. Welcome to the Standing Committee on National Defence, and pursuant to Standing Order 1082, we are here for the study of Canada's response to ISIL. We have three witnesses before us today. They are Rear Admiral Gilles Couturier, Director General, International Security Policy, Colonel Marc Gendron, Deputy Judge Advocate General, Operations, and Major General Michael Hood, the Director of Staff of the Strategic Joint Staff.
Point of order, Mr. Chairman.
Point of order, Mr. Harris.
Yes, sir. Mr. Chairman, on Tuesday or on Thursday last, you announced that this meeting was going to be held here in this room for reasons of the public being available to see this because of being televised, and we're grateful to that. We're also very grateful to have our witnesses here today. But my concern is that at the same time that this is taking place, General Vance, who is General Jonathan Vance, who's in charge of the chief of the Joint Operations Command, is making a presentation, technical briefing for the media, who therefore can't be here. Did the same thing on October the 17th, when the Parliament was not in session and no members of Parliament was here. And this is the committee to which, which is given responsibility for accountability of the government to Parliament. We are the parliamentarians, and yet we have somehow or other seem to be dragging media away from the parliamentary process, and in fact a senior general in charge of operations, joint operations, doing these briefings to the media who can't therefore be here at this Parliament. I find that objectionable, Mr. Chair, and I want to put that on the record.
Thank you. Well, I recognize that point. Mr. Bazan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We have, as parliamentarians, no control over department officials when they can't appear. General Vance, for whatever reason, could only do his briefing today at 3 o'clock. And I don't think we should be critical of that, and I'd hope that as parliamentarians that we are trying to manage our schedules for the benefit of the media. So we're here, we're joined by upper leadership within Department of National Defence and Canadian Armed Forces, and I think we should be grateful for that, and I'm looking forward to their presentations.
Thank you very much, Mr. Bazan and Mr. Harris. I take both points under advisement. I'm sure that there will be opportunities for further discussion for procedures and practices in the future. But for now, General Hood, your opening remarks, please.
Mr. Chair, members of the committee, thank you for the invitation to appear in front of you today. I'm pleased to be here today to provide you with a summary of Operation Impact, the Canadian Armed Forces' contribution to the U.S.-led multinational coalition in Iraq, assisting the government of Iraq in the fight against the Islamic State of Iraq in the Levant, or ISIL. I'm Major General Michael Hood, the Director of Staff. I'm pleased to have with me Rear Admiral Gilles Couturier, who is the Director General International Security Policy, and Colonel Marc Gendron to my left, the Deputy Judge Advocate General for Operations. J'aimerais passer en revue avec vous aujourd'hui les contributions actuelles.
I would like to walk you through the Canadian Armed Forces' present contributions to the mission, after which we would be pleased to answer your questions.
ISIL began seizing territory throughout the Republic of Iraq, and since that time, Iraqi security forces have been engaged in an ongoing struggle with this well-armed and well-organized terrorist entity. Their strategy in Iraq is to create a state based on their radical ideology, and their advances have both threatened and displaced many thousands of Iraqis and has caused a humanitarian crisis threatening the stability of the entire region. Their reach, however, is simply not limited to the Middle East, as even outside of Iraq's borders, ISIL threatens the security of Western countries with calls for sympathizers to conduct targeted attacks. In late September, the government of Iraq requested, through the United Nations Security Council, that the U.S. help lead an international coalition to help Iraq defend itself against ISIL. The U.S. has responded to Iraq's request and has facilitated the creation of an international coalition committed to containing further ISIL expansion and countering the threat posed by ISIL to regional and international security. The Canadian Armed Forces' contribution to Iraq's fight against ISIL began in August, when the Government of Canada directed the Armed Forces to provide strategic airlift of military aid in support of international efforts to assist the Republic of Iraq. The Canadian Air Task Force Iraq, consisting of one Royal Canadian Air Force CC-130J Hercules and one C-17 Globemaster III, and approximately 100 aircrew technicians, logistics, and specialists, were quickly deployed to the Middle East for this task. Over the next 6 weeks, the Royal Canadian Air Force flew 25 flights and delivered over £1.6 million of badly needed military supplies donated by Albania and the Czech Republic to Iraqi security forces. As well, since early October, a team of highly trained Special Operations Forces have been deployed to Iraq to advise and assist Iraqi security forces with their struggle against ISIL. The team of Canadian Special Operations Forces personnel will mentor and facilitate training of Iraqi forces focusing on the planning, preparation, and conduct of operations against ISIL. This valuable assistance will help Iraqi forces improve their tactical and technical proficiency so that they are better able to train for and conduct operations against ISIL. Le 5 octobre, le gouvernement
On October 5th, the Government of Canada announced that the Canadian Armed Forces will contribute to the international coalition conducting airstrikes in Iraq with the aim of degrading ISIL's ability to carry out military operations against the people of the Republic of Iraq.
The Airbus, Hercules, and Globemaster, the CAF has deployed a joint task force to augment ongoing coalition operations in Iraq. It includes 6 CF-188 Hornet fighter aircraft, 1 CC-150 Tango Polaris aerial refueler, 2 CP-140 Aurora surveillance aircraft, and nearly 600 personnel, including aircrew and support personnel. We also have planning teams working alongside coalition counterparts and a wide network of liaison officers deployed with our mission partners. The Joint Task Force commenced operations on the 30th of October and is currently employed in 3 distinct lines of operations. The Polaris is conducting air-to-air refueling operations in support of Canadian and coalition aircraft operating against ISIL. The 2 Aurora aircraft are conducting valuable intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance, or ISR, missions over Iraq to gather information on ISIL. And the Hornets are conducting strike missions against identified ISIL targets. The Hornets, operating under national rules of engagement, use precision-guided munitions against targets that have been validated by a rigorous targeting process and authorized by our own national chain of command. L'opération Impact est une contribution importante.
Operation Impact is a significant and valuable contribution to the international coalition assisting the Republic of Iraq in its fight against ISIL. This mission clearly demonstrates Canadian resolve to combat ISIL's radical ideology and supports coalition efforts to rapidly contain ISIL and to degrade their combat capability such that Iraqi forces can advance and expel ISIL from the Republic of Iraq. Furthermore, it demonstrates our resolve to stand with our allies and make positive contributions to international peace and security.
Much has been achieved in the fight to stem the advance of ISIL since the beginning of coalition operations. Iraqi security forces in northern Iraq, who received military supplies airlifted by our RCAF aircraft, have stemmed the ISIL advance. However, there remains more to do. and the Canadian Armed Forces are committed to this continued effort to support Iraqi security forces and the democratically elected government of Iraq. Thank you for your time. Myself and my colleagues would be happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you very much, General Hood. And we will, Mr. LaRose, you have a point of order.
Oui, un rappel au règlement, Monsieur le Président.
Yes, point of order, Mr. Chair. I'd like to know if I'd had the opportunity to question the witnesses today or in any committee that I would sit on. And I also want to raise a point of order to have my privileges as a member of this committee under Section 104, and I want to have them respected. On November 5th, 2013, it was said that during the second round of questioning, and I quote, "The principle is that any member of the committee must be able to question witnesses." So I would like to ask you once again, will I be able to question the witnesses today and subsequently in other committees as well?
As colleagues know, as chair of this committee, I have to ensure that the rules of the committee, both as prescribed by the House of Commons procedure and practice, as well as the routine motion which was passed at the time that this committee was constituted, are carried out. My role is to ensure that those rules and procedures are carried out fairly, and in recent days that has been somewhat more challenging. And Mr. LaRose is quite correct in recognizing that the principle stated in the routine motion is that each committee member should have a full opportunity to question the witnesses, and there is a need, and we respected that at our last meeting. And colleagues, I would ask you, because of the time lost due to parliamentary business today, that we limit discussion, further discussion on this. I propose, I've decided that based on the routine motion and the intent of that motion, my interpretation of the intent of the motion, I will give the member for Repentigny, Monsieur LaRose, a slot at the end of the second round of questioning for today's meeting. That said, and in order to ensure continuing decorum of this committee, I would suggest that the committee take time on Thursday, November the 6th, 2 days hence, to discuss the order of questioning and to deliver clear instructions to the chair going forward. So, colleagues, again, with your approval, we will now begin the first round of questioning, 7-minute slots. Mr. Norlock, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you to the witnesses, thank you for attending today. My first question will be, I think, a question that's on all Canadians' minds right now. In the last 48 hours, we have seen our Canadian Armed Forces, and in particular the RCAF, directly engaged in the theatre. And I wonder, I know that there's some things you can say and some things you can't say, but for the benefit of those Canadians who are watching and this committee, could you sort of give us a rundown or run through what occurred in the last 48 hours vis-a-vis the airstrikes that occurred most recently?
I can. Thank you, Mr. Norlock. I did take the opportunity before coming here to actually close with Lieutenant General Vance, so I have a reasonably fresh summary from the operational command. But I'll start. The Air Task Force and the aircraft involved arrived at destination in Kuwait on the 28th of October and commenced flying operations on the 30th. Since that time, and including in the last 24 hours, RCF aircraft have flown 27 sorties, which include 18 by fighter aircraft, 4 by our Polaris tanker, and 5 by the CP-140 ISR aircraft. On the 31st of October, 1 CP-140 Aurora conducted intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance operations which directly supported coalition efforts. The Aurora enabled multiple coalition fighter aircraft to strike ISIL targets in the vicinity of Al-Qaim. The strike resulted in the destruction of a key ISIL base that was used to stage operations from the border area into the Euphrates line of communications. The Aurora was a platform lead for the mission and provided important battle damage assessments to evaluate the success of strikes. On the 2nd of November, Sunday, CF-18 Hornets conducted first combat airstrike on ISIL targets. The 4 targets were located near a dam west of Fallujah and consisted of heavy engineering vehicles. They were being used to divert water from the Euphrates rivers to create flooding and displace the population in Anbar province, while also denying water to other populations downstream. By flooding certain areas, ISIL forced civilians and Iraqi security forces onto specific routes, which they then placed improvised explosive devices, or IEDs. Additionally, the heavy engineering vehicles were being used to develop and enhance defensive positions, which would have made future clearing operations for the Iraqi security forces more difficult. Our forces worked with the Combined Air Operations Center and coalition targeting assets during the approximate 4-hour flight. 500-pound laser-guided bombs destroyed and damaged the heavy engineering vehicles identified and removed them from further employment. The degradation of ISIL's ability to use the dam as a weapon contributes to ensuring that they will not be able to use the Euphrates River against the population of Anbar province. The attacks also assured the removal of heavy equipment necessary to develop defensive positions that would eventually have been taken by security forces. So that's a summary of some of the activity over the last 4 days, and certainly the intent would be to continue to provide regular updates through tech briefings, likely on a weekly briefing where we'd be able to summarize what is transpired.
Thank you very much, General Hood. My second question is, I think, more than just a personal observation. It's something that other members of Parliament have discussed with me, and for sure some of my constituents. And I wonder if you wouldn't mind commenting that many hours prior to the official release by CF, Canadian Forces, as to our actions that you have just described to us, we heard it from U.S. news sources. And I'm wondering if there isn't a better coordinated way that you either can respond today or can bring back to senior command staff that we cooperate in both our theater of war, but cooperate also on the news releases so that Canadians who are very much heavily invested in this operation at least get to know what's going on at the same time as American counterparts, and we don't have to watch American television to find out what's going on. I wonder if you feel like you would like to comment on that.
Well, I'll certainly offer just a brief perspective, sir. From what I'd seen, the first announcement of the strikes that had taken place on Sunday was through a press release by the Minister of National Defense. We coordinate very closely with allies and the U.S. Command in Central Command in Tampa and move forward, I think, as you well can imagine, in coordinating the size of activity, the number of partners that are in there. It's definitely going to take some close coordination. We appreciate that some of this information was subsequently released by CENTCOM before we were able to organize a tech brief. At the time, General Vance was down in Tampa, liaising with General Austin, the commander of CENTCOM, and in fact, the timing of his tech brief today was related to his return travel for that. But we will put every endeavor to get better at that, sir.
Thank you very much. It's just very helpful from our perspective, and we'll try to do the same from the civilian side of things. One other question, you know, one of the things we're asked, once again, for this tremendous investment, absolutely, especially the human investment that we have in this operation, is, and people ask, are we making gains? I'm led to believe, and you can corroborate it or not, that our operations, the allied operations that are occurring currently, that we are actively engaged in now, have resulted in the ability of our to support the Kurds, the Shias, and some other and the other folks on our side, shall we say, to make gains that they may not have otherwise been able to make. You alluded to why we are striking. I wonder if you could give us some observations as to the success of the endeavor so far in our aim to assist the Iraqi government forces.
Well, I can certainly try. You know, while Canada has just started operations, air operations, other coalition allies have been active for quite some period. And you'll recall how quick the ISIL advance was into Iraq. In fact, the map that I've put up really shows their areas of advances towards their main objective, which is the capture of Baghdad. In that quick advance, they were gaining momentum, traveling in very large and sometimes armored formations that in many events, as they approached Iraqi-controlled areas, were able to quickly advance through that in part just by the mass and the sheer size of the force that was coming forward. Allied air activity has blunted that advance. And in fact, as you may have heard, certainly reported publicly, they no longer travel in large formations because those are simply just too easy targets for air power to take forward. So we've seen now ISIL move to more asymmetric style of attack, which by and large, while still a challenge for Iraqi security forces, does not pose the same level of threat as their massed advances previously.
Thank you, General Hood. Mr. Norlock, Mr. Harris, please.
Thank you, gentlemen, for your presence here today and for your presentation. And I guess I, along with Mr. Norlock and many Canadians, did wonder why we heard from the United States before we heard from our own government. We were getting rather opaque statements from the Minister of Defense, and I'm surprised that you first heard of it through a press release as opposed to the chain of command. You are not in the chain of command in relation to this operation?
No, I am. I should have correctly stated that Canadians would have first heard about it. I had heard of it prior to that press release. And
so I guess that's my first question. What is the chain of command? Is it this run out of Tampa, Florida, as you pointed out? I mean, it's not a NATO operation, which we've had before in Libya, for example, where it was a joint command led by General Bouchard. This is led by the general you spoke of in Tampa. Is that correct?
Perhaps I can just provide some context. So all Canadian Forces personnel that are deployed are under the full command of the Chief of Defence Staff, General Lawson.
But
Where
where does General Vance fit in? He was down in Tampa.
Pardon me?
Where does General Vance fit in?
So General Vance is the commander of Joint Operation Command here in Ottawa, and he is in charge of deployed operations in a Canadian chain of command. We're working in a coalition, a rather large coalition with close allies, which is a U.S.-led and coordinated coalition campaign run by Central Command. They have headquarters in the region, but their main headquarters with a lot of allied liaison officers is down in Tampa, as it has been since previous iterations of activity in the region.
So I guess that gets us to the first target, being what the Americans at least call a bulldozer and a dump truck. You're talking about heavy construction equipment. Was that chosen by Canada, or as we've heard in reports that this was proposed by the United States? Could you go through, and maybe Colonel Jean can help us with that? I know from the Libyan operation that ultimately Canada can decide what targets to take, but I'm mindful of the fact that bulldozers and dump trucks are normally not driven by soldiers in civilian situations. So how is that decision-making take place from Canada's point of view? And an added point, General Vance did on October 17th say that there was a revised rules of engagement at work here. Can you explain that, perhaps?
Absolutely, Mr. Harris. So, first of all, with respect to a coalition campaign, there is a shared joint view of the targets, in this case, in Iraq. Those are prioritized against the objectives that may be in play at the time in coordination with Iraqis. The tasking of missions, so Canadian aircraft or any of our allied aircraft, are coordinated through CENTCOM, and targets are assigned against those missions. That then comes into a Canadian chain of command. And we have a theater engagement authority in the Air Operations Center that ultimately is in charge of viewing that every target that Canada would consider striking has a Canadian view in line with our rules of engagement, which I'll get to. If collateral damage or any risk is seen in the conduct of that target, that will then be pushed out of theater to General Vance. He has a level of targets that he can approve. When he can't, it ultimately goes up to the Chief of Defence Staff. So that targeting chain is completely approved by Canada, ultimately by the pilot when he releases the weapons. Now, we don't generally talk about rules of engagement writ large. Suffice it to say that the Chief approves specific rules of engagement which enables the disciplined use of force by Canadian forces in this particular conduct. So there is a set of rules of engagement which I'm not going to discuss right now, but I can tell you that from an Allied perspective, this is the most accurate conflict that we've ever been party to. It's accurate because of the weapons that we're using. It's accurate because of the limits we've put on collateral damage, and hence why you haven't seen aircraft drop on every strike mission, because we are taking such care. With respect to the targets in this specific one, it's clear that as a campaign objective, the flooding of the Euphrates or the denying of water to downstream is of great concern to the Iraqi government. Hence, that target would come up and be prioritized within that period of time. My Army colleagues would tell you that engineering equipment is some of the most valuable and protected greatly on a battlefield. And hence, in this case, it was viewed as a highly prioritized target by CENTCOM and then through the Canadian chain and ultimately approved for a Canadian strike.
Again, given the fact that this was, and I get the strategic value of the target from your explanation, but one of the early critiques of the notion of airstrikes in Iraq, particularly given the large number of countries who had signed up to do that, was the perhaps very soon paucity of targets, that very soon you might, quote, run out of targets, unquote, and even General Lawson referred to that recently as well. I take it that that is not why the target that we were talking about this weekend was chosen, but is that a concern for you, as you mentioned, the fact that they've changed their tactics, they're not going to be out in the open with tanks and Humvees or whatever open to attack. Are we in danger of being ineffective in a very short period of time?
Well, I don't think so at all, Mr. Harris. In fact, the effect that air power has brought in this particular conflict is clearly evident. Now, I think it's accepted and would be expected by members here today that air power alone is not going to push back ISIL. But what it is going to do is it's going to deny them freedom of maneuver. So whether we're actually striking deliberate targets or targets that may arise over the course of events, the deterrent effect of air power being there and the success that the coalition is enjoying in those strikes is having real effects. We've seen it. You would have seen some reporting on the news, whether it was the stabilization north of Mosul with Peshmerga forces, all supported by Allied air power. And there remains targets, and there will continue to remain targets, but we've just got to adapt to the dispersed tactics that ISIL has evolved the campaign to.
Thank you, General. Mr. Chizu, please, 7 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Thank you very much for the witnesses for your presentation, General. I have a question to you. You were mentioning, of course, about the engineering vehicles. They were armored engineering vehicles and obviously operated by military personnel, right? When you chose the targets.
So the targets were engineering vehicles. I wouldn't be able to describe the level of armor. I haven't had a briefing that would allow that to say, but they were being used regularly by ISIL in the construction of a dam and defensive positions.
As I have seen heard from literature and from research, the ISL has extremely powerful military capabilities and have used them to overtake huge swaths of territory in Iraq and Syria, as we see on the map. If ISL is not degraded and ultimately destroyed by the coalition, what do you foresee ISL being capable of? How much more damage could they inflict in Iraq and Syria if not confronted by coalition airstrikes that are going on?
Well, I wouldn't want to hypothesize on what could have happened, but I think if you were to look at the advance just in context of Iraq that ISIL had enjoyed very quickly, this is of great concern, hence why so many regional partners have joined some of our more traditional partners and other NATO countries in this coalition. There's a shared view that ISIL presents not only a threat to Iraq and Syria, but to regional stability and certainly to many Western countries as well as their reaches. So I think that the very rapid stand-up of a coalition speaks volumes to the risk that many countries feel that ISIL represented at the time and continues to represent today.
In your opinion, what is the level of training that ISL got? Because they were moving very quickly in quite a large number. So where is originating the training, or how we are assessing this threat?
Well, what I've certainly seen and been briefed is that you have to remember that operations in Syria, so against the Assad regime by both the Free Syrian Army and a conglomerate of ideologically motivated entities, has been going on for almost 2 years. So those troops, those ISIL forces that are in Iraq, are battle-hardened. Add to that a number of senior former Iraqi military personnel, Ba'athist parties, for example, disenfranchised from that. And the assessment is that they're well-led, well-experienced, and very motivated. So they do represent a considerable threat to Iraq.
Looking at their military capabilities, it does not appear that they currently have the capabilities to pose a threat to our aircraft. Is a danger that they will be able to have this kind of equipment?
So we take every step in operations, both through the use of integral defensive equipment on our aircraft, but also on the tactics, techniques, and procedures we do to limit that threat. I'm not going to talk specifically about what ISIL may or may not have, but suffice it to say that every step of our operations, the mitigation of any risk to our personnel is first and foremost in our mind.
You know, being in Afghanistan, I was concerned about the man-pads, and I have seen the ISL has man-pads and all other heavy military assets like tanks, and you know, that is a problem who eventually, for the coalition, will be a bigger threat. So I think the airstrikes are having an effect on ISL.
It's a threat we take very seriously, as I said. So we will try and ensure that the aircraft are equipped to deal with those risks, or that we plan mission parameters that ensure to the greatest extent possible. I think it's important to say that, though, in any part of our contribution, it's not risk-free. There's no way we can mitigate that risk to zero. So it is a dangerous theater of operation, but we put our welfare of our men and women in uniform first and foremost.
The other thing I would add to that, if I may, is the coalition puts a lot of emphasis on trying to locate, from an intelligence perspective, any indication that we have that those kind of capabilities are falling in those hands. So yes, it's a great concern for us in Canada, but it's an overall concern for the coalition. And we're certainly putting a lot of effort to understand and get as much warning as we can if that kind of capability would get in their hand.
So when you're operating on this theater of operation, you have also different type of aircrafts. The French, they have different type of aircrafts, the Portuguese so do you think that the training that you have, that the Air Force had in Romania with the coalition, is helpful, or it was helpful?
Well, I mean, I think, sir, any training that adds to the capability of our personnel is very valuable, and I would certainly put the professionalism and capability of our CF-18 pilots up against any member of the coalition, without a doubt, and I say that very sincerely.
It also talks to the interoperability that we have as we go through all the exercises that we do all year long. The fact that we can now operate together in an operation kind of setting speaks volume of all the training that we've been doing.
So, what kind of military strategies the ISL is using? You mentioned that they are now dispersing in small units, and what is the danger that they can put from the military point of view for us in the future operation?
No, absolutely. I mean, Iraqi security forces are going to certainly have some challenges moving forward against a very determined adversary who is motivated through, barbarous ideology that really just, in fact, inflicts terror on those that are under some. The dispersion of them presents a different problem for ground forces to deal with, but I'm pretty confident that given the time, the support, and the training, that Iraqi security forces will be able to prevail.
Thank you, General. Time, Mr. Chizu. Ms. Murray, please.
Thank you, General. Are you able to advise us as to the projected budget for this 6-month mission?
I'm not, Ms. Murray. The Chief Financial Officer of the Department is in the process of capturing these, and I understand that these will be reported to Parliament at an appropriate time, likely in some months.
Okay, so before the 6 months is up, so I mean, can you give us an estimate of when that will be available?
No, I'm unable to.
Thank you. What role are our special forces playing? Are they involved with training the Iraqi and Kurdish fighters? And where is this training taking place? Are they providing close combat advising, or are they in a central location?
Thanks for that question. I mean, we've been focused on the RCF portion of it. It's important to remember that we have had 69 Special Operations Forces operating out of Erbil, the northern area of Iraq on the map behind you, working closely with Kurdish forces. They're in the vicinity of Erbil, forward and working with various Peshmerga units in what we call an advise and assist role. The Peshmerga in that area are essentially in defensive positions. Gives us an opportunity to, in many cases, in a classroom or in an open-air setting, work on both basic skills, depending on the forces that we're advising and assisting, but also eventually in the planning, the pre-mission planning of future operations that the Iraqi security forces may contemplate.
So is this close combat advising at this point?
I wouldn't say it's close combat advising, no. I mean, again, they're certainly in the vicinity of what's recognized as Kurdish front lines. They're not at the front lines, but they have to go where the forces are. Again, it's not risk-free, but it's not close combat. We haven't been involved in supporting them. That's not really part of the mandate at this point.
If I may add on the Peshmerga, they are key to the success of that fight. They are one of the most proficient forces that they have in the region, and the fact that we have the opportunity to help them get to the point where they can be an effective force in the region is an important role that we see for our special forces.
Thank you. And the Liberals a month ago proposed that providing training support could be a unique and special contribution of the Canadian Armed Forces, a military non-combat contribution, seeing as how our armed forces were so effective with that in Afghanistan over the 4-year period. So is there a discussion about the armed forces providing additional contribution to training with the Peshmerga or with the Iraqi security forces themselves?
Well, the mission right now and the parameters of the mission, I think, are familiar to all of you. We've been authorized for 6 months with the air element I've talked to and the special operations forces. As situation changes and advice is brought forward from the Chief of Defense Staff to government, there may very well be other options that are contemplated, but not at this immediate time.
So also, I'm interested in other non-combat roles that our Canadian Armed Forces could play. I mean, my understanding is that the airstrikes dispersed the open convoys weeks ago, and so there may be other ways that Canada can provide more of a contribution. And so with respect to the humanitarian needs in the area, and the civilian distress, is there a need for security for humanitarian assistance? And if so, is that a role that Canada would be able to help with?
Just let me provide some context first. Certainly, there are and continue to be targets to strike. So this notion that there aren't targets for airstrikes is not, in fact, correct at this point. With respect to what you were talking about, security for humanitarian efforts, I'm going to ask my colleague to talk about those in a second, but it's important to note that the Iraqis and the Iraqi security forces actually don't want our support on the ground in the fight. They actually want to own that fight. They see it as an Iraqi fight to take forward. So,
clarify, I'm not suggesting a combat role for the Canadian Armed Forces. So I do have one last question. In one of the briefings, a commentator was quoted as saying that sophisticated online media and propaganda campaign underpins ISIL's success. Would you, or success to date, would you, what's your comment on that statement? And secondly, what, if anything, can Canada and our intelligence agencies do to help counter that effectiveness with online propaganda?
So I would agree wholeheartedly that there are many facets and many instruments of power that can be brought to bear in this campaign. And the point that you talk of, which I think we'd call the information campaign, is certainly an area that allies recognize that they need to address. They need to counter the ideology that is prevalent, that is causing young men and women in the region to fight for ISIL. With respect to what other entities in the Government of Canada can do, it's not really my place to speak to public safety or the other services that are involved in that, but I'm sure that would be considered in due course.
Thank you, General. Ms. Murray. Ms. Gallant, please.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I'm really pleased that the opposition, the Liberals, have decided to support what our special forces are doing on the ground there. Now, with respect to the special forces, what sorts of successes can you describe that they have had in training the Kurds and the Peshmergas?
I think there are a number of forces in the area. I mean, Peshmerga is a generalized term. There are Kurdish security forces. There are Peshmerga, which would be more akin to, I think, a militia. There are doctors and lawyers in Erbil who take their turn on the front line in a very traditional defensive piece. So there are varying levels of expertise in there, including very high capability, as my colleague spoke to. So, I mean, the successes that are taking place is we have a very, very willing partner who is actually asking us for as much as we can possibly do in the support to raise them for, I think, what they recognize is the eventual ground part of the campaign that they're going to play a large role in.
So how transient are the forces that they're training and working with? You mentioned that doctors and lawyers take their turn on the front line. Are they dealing with the same people for a week, several weeks, and then new people trickle in and people who've been there trickle out?
I think in large part the forces are static. I was trying to refer to an entity to give you a sense of the varying levels of capability and experience that it depends the type of mentoring that you could provide. But again, they're a hardened force. They've been at this for some time, and I think that we've had experience. We're getting to know them better. We're getting to understand what their needs are, and we'll continue to improve our level of support to them as we get more experienced in working with them.
And what have our special forces said about working with the Kurds?
So I've only spoken with the commander of Special Operations Force Command in a more broader general sense. Wouldn't have a vignette or a touchstone to kind of bring to you on those lines. I can certainly try and get one for you, though.
Okay. Now, with respect to the capabilities of ISIL, they have heavy weapons, tanks, armored personnel carriers, and tactical units. Are there any ISIL targets that are easier than others to hit with airstrikes?
I think where you're trying to take me is to delve into the tactics and the rest of the ground campaign. And, you know, we really talk in terms of deliberate or dynamic targets. So dynamic targets are those that aren't static. A deliberate target could be a command post, a checkpoint, something that we know is there is not likely to move. So in that sense, a deliberate target would be easier, whereas a dynamic target is something that is not necessarily static.
Okay, so the dynamic targets are tougher to hit. Is that what you're saying?
Generally speaking.
Okay, now when we look at the map that you've provided, recognizing that this is more or less our theater of operations, would you be able to describe how the flow, the areas of influence of ISIL came to pass? Was it centralized and then spread from the different directions? How did these two bands form?
So those red bands actually represent the two principal routes between Syria and into Baghdad. They converge at Baghdad. And if you look closely at a map of Iraq, you'll notice that most of the cities, the infrastructure is really centralized on those two bands. Iraq has wide swaths of desert, for instance, to the south of that bottom band, that there just simply isn't really anyone there. So where their area of influence is, in fact, the direct route that they've taken between Syria and Baghdad.
Okay, so the areas that are mostly populated. Now, given that this is our theater of operations, or our area of concern, if we were to look to where ISIL's influence extends further, because that may have some sort of impact on our operations in Iraq, how far would those bands go into Syria and other surrounding countries?
Most of northern Syria and those lines of communications are under the complete control of ISIL or ISIL-friendly entities. There is a Kurdish part in northern Syria, and then you would actually end up with regime capabilities south of Aleppo. I don't have it on this map because I was focusing my comments on Iraq. But it's safe to say a very large part of Syria is under ISIL control.
Ms. Galland. Mr. Harris, I understand you're sharing time with Mr. Chiquan.
That's correct. I just have an initial question. And General Hood, I was rather surprised, I guess, at your answer to Ms. Murray about the question of cost estimates, because on October 17th, General Lawson told the media in a press briefing that the cost estimates for the military contribution have actually been provided to Cabinet. So why would you tell us that the CFO is actually preparing them, and giving us the impression that there are no such thing as cost estimates available. That bothers me a little bit, and maybe it's a public relations gesture of some sort. I mean,
Mr. Harris,
if these estimates exist, either we're being denied them or there's some other story.
I've said previously before this committee that I'm not, in my position, responsible for the costs of the Department of National Defense.
I understand that, but I understand that, but the information seems to be that they do exist. You may not know them. General Vance, does General Vance know them, do you think?
So estimates are always provided in general terms when different activities are contemplated to give a sense of what they may be. But those differ often quite greatly from what we expend on those operations. So we use them just as a touch point, but then they're updated with real costs coming in and then reported to government and the minister at the appropriate time.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Je vous remercie également.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I'd also like to thank our witnesses, first of all, for your service, and secondly, for being here with us today to enlighten us about the mission in Iraq. Major General, you spoke a little bit in your presentation about Canada's 30-day training mission, which began on September 5th. But I'd like you to give us a fuller picture of that and to tell us a little bit about what the consequences of that training mission were. Oh, I'm sorry. I do understand French, but I didn't entirely catch your question. Would you mind repeating the first part? Yes, of course. I'd just like you to tell us a little bit more in depth about the 30-day training mission and what the concrete results of that mission were, that mission from early September. Well, we started with our Special Operations Forces, and at the beginning they had a 30-day mandate. The idea was that we would report on our progress working with the Peshmergas. And we spoke to the government about that subject. The decision was made to establish the Air Task Force. And now we have a 6-month mission for both the Special Operations Forces and also for the Royal Canadian Air Force. Yes, but could you give us a little bit more information about the results of the mission? Did it really help the Peshmergas? Do you have a little bit more information about the concrete results? Well, for the first 30 days, the goal was to send special forces to have an idea of what might help improve the situation on Iraqi soil. So we had a discussion with people in Iraq to ensure that they were willing to work with us. And we also spoke to the Americans who are currently deployed in the region. Now, from those first exchanges, we developed a preliminary plan about what we could do in the region with our special forces. We came back to the government with that report. Canada was involved in the transport of munitions and weapons to the Peshmergas to help them fight the Islamic State. What have been the results of Canada's participation in that, and are we still transporting weapons? Well, our role in that mission is now concluded, as General Hood explained. We work closely with Foreign Affairs, and we provided equipment to the Iraqi forces at Erbil. So now it is the Iraqi forces who control that equipment and who are distributing it to the people who need it the most in this fight against ISIL. Thank you. The American Army, notably Mr. Kirby, mentioned that this mission could last many years, much more than just 6 months or a year. So I would like you, not necessarily to state an opinion on that, but to discuss a little bit this perception that the American Army expects the mission to last much longer. And is the Canadian Army ready to engage in that, given the last 10 years, the events of the last 10 years? Is our Army ready to engage in a conflict that could potentially last several years. First of all, our mission, as it has currently been approved by the government, will last for 6 months. I think that the coalition mission could last much longer than 6 months. We are currently working on stopping ISIL's advance, but we need the Iraqi forces to be properly trained and prepared to undertake missions from a ground war perspective. Apart from that, I do think, yes, it will take more than 6 months.
Please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And gentlemen, good to see you here today. Thank you for attending. I got a couple of questions that I'm hoping you might be able to answer just to shed some light on the situation on the ground in Iraq. Do you know, I thought your description of the two red bands was very helpful. What percentage of the Iraqi population lives under those ISIL-controlled territory? Do you have any idea?
I wouldn't want to hazard a guess. I will tell you that Mosul, which is under ISIL control, is the second largest city in Iraq. So certainly a significant proportion. But there are certainly to the east of Baghdad, down towards Kuwait, very heavy Iraqi population. So I don't have the specific numbers with me offhand.
Okay. In most, I'm going back to the kind of my recollection from the Gulf War and Gulf War II, is most of the refining capability on the coast near Kuwait, or what kind of refining capability do you find in those ISIL territories?
There's significant oil refining capability that is in that red banded area. Badji, which you may have heard, the oil refinery, actually supplied, I believe, 80% of the oil to the western part of the country. Badji is near Tikrit on that map. Now, while there are significant oil refinery capabilities in the south around Basra and on the coast, it's fair to say that it is distributed widely, so they would have actually that under control.
Okay, thank you. With Royal Canadian Air Force in theater, how does it operate? This is kind of going where Mr. Harris went in terms of, do we operate on a grid formation where there's just airspace that is Canada's, or are we working more in collaboration with our allies? How does the theater work in terms of our airspace versus others? Is it a grid format, or how?
No, not at all. It certainly depends where the air activity is going to be. I mean, allies are by and large interchangeable. Our ISR assets will not only operate in support of Canadian missions, they'll be in support of other allied missions. So it really is interchangeable, and that air tasking order, that process I was talking about targeting, assigns targeting and specific areas for operations. It indicates where our tankers would position themselves in the airspace, and our tankers are providing fuel to a number of different platforms, not just Canadians. So it's very dynamic. It's far from a set grid box, as you were suggesting.
Thank you. It had been mentioned that ISIL has now split into smaller groups. What do you reckon their objective is now, given that they don't appear to be anyway on the move the way they were before? I mean, clearly they have significant territory already and sizable cities under their control. Is there a sense of what their military objective is going forward?
Their objective is unchanged. Their objective is Baghdad as the eastern front of their view of what their caliphate may or may not look like. So while we talk about dispersed, while it may be a little more challenging for them to take that on, that remains their objective to the best of our understanding.
So what do you think their strategy is? Is it to attempt to wait out Allied Air Force and lay low? Is it to attempt to advance when they can? What's the sense? Are we seeing less of a movement now, and what do you think their strategy is to try to move forward and move around or into Baghdad?
I don't think I would venture to hypothesize what their strategy may be. Nonetheless, they remain committed moving forward. We're seeing advances. They're being pushed back in other areas. They're a significant fighting entity, even in a more dispersed view that I spoke to. But I wouldn't be able to talk about their evolving tactics.
You had mentioned that Iraqi forces are not keen to see, I guess we'll call them Western ground troops. Is that, I don't want to misquote you here, but or misspeak on your behalf, but is that accurate?
The Iraqi security forces want to be responsible for the fight.
But I wouldn't qualify it as only Western, though. They don't want any foreign forces.
Fair enough. I'll come back to you, gentlemen. Thank you.
Mr. Harris, please.
Thank you, Chair. Perhaps we can follow up on that in terms of the capability of the Iraqi army. Mr. Sheshu talked about the large forces and equipment that they had, although in looking at a paper prepared by the Library of Parliament, we're talking 60 or 70 tanks, perhaps a large number of Humvees. And the army that they defeated appeared to have just disappeared by virtue of the commanders disappearing. And when we read about what was left behind by the Americans, a 1 million soldier ground force owned by the Iraqi army, is that the army that we're talking about that's going to take the ground fight? And that seems to be a very large number of soldiers when we're talking about maybe 20, maybe 50,000 fighters that the ISIS has both in Iraq and Syria.
The numbers that I'm aware of the size of the Iraqi security forces before ISIL come across would have been about 250,000. It isn't
the Iraqi soldiers or
the Iraqi security forces writ large. That was evident. It was about 250,000. There's no doubt that in the initial attacks and essentially the withdrawal, those numbers have significantly reduced, and the actual fighting force of the Iraqis is significantly less than that right now.
Of their ability to reform, is there a command issue with respect to the ability to put commanders in the field that are trusted and capable of leading?
No, I mean, I think that what we're working with now, our view of what the Iraqi security forces look like right now, they are capable. The challenge is they have not been training to the extent that you would expect in advance of major combat operations. So part of certainly the strategy is for allies in the coalition to provide a level of training to Iraqi security forces such that they could take the fight forward themselves.
In terms of, again, to follow on Mr. Williams' questions about the coordination of airspace, is there sort of a AWAC running air traffic control? Is that how it's commanded on the ground, or is that this done out of Tampa as well?
It's a mixture of ground radar, but there are air assets from a number of different countries, AWACS, Australian Wedgetail, for example.
In terms of one of the issues that's come up is the need for Canada to obtain further munitions and equipment, but these smart bomb kits, etc. And one question was raised was the cuts to stockpile that Canada had, despite the urging of Public Works. Has that proven difficult to manage? Can you tell us about that? Supposedly there was a 38% cut to stockpiles of Canadian munitions. Has that been corrected, and has that resulted in a greater cost?
So in the context of the present campaign that we're in and the smart bombs that I spoke of, there certainly is no shortage. We have plenty of them, and they're in theater and ready to be used appropriately. So there is no certainly short-term or long-term impact with respect to RCF weapons.
I suppose I have a couple of minutes left.
You have a minute and a half.
A minute and a half. Well, perhaps I'll use it to go back to the cost issue. You know, we've heard rough estimates of in the neighborhood of $300 million. We've seen reports about Libya in the range of $350 million as the actual cost of that mission here. I guess the question that I have, if we are talking about costs in those range, what's the effect on other Department of Defense programs where we've already had complaints about the military having difficulty meeting training requirements and readiness because of the budget cuts and that matter? Are you anticipating anything like that, or is there any contingency plan to deal with
Mr. Bazan?
You know, I brought this up in the past numerous times that, there's certain questions that witnesses aren't able to answer, and if I refer to page 1068 and 1069, chapter 20 of O'Brien Boss, it says, committees ordinarily accept reasons that public servant gives to declining an answer to a specific question or a series of questions which involve giving of legal opinion which may be perceived as a conflict with the witness's responsibility to the minister, or which are outside of their own area of responsibility or might affect business transactions. I think in this situation, budget questions are outside of the area of responsibility of General Hood and his colleagues.
Point made. Can you simplify your question reform?
Well, I guess the question is, as a member of the Joint Staff, you obviously have issues involving different aspects of the military. Do you have a concern, does the staff have a concern that other aspects of military might be affected by it?
Point of order.
Point of order, then, is it's not relevant to the study at hand. It's not relevant to the issue at hand, which is talking about ISIS.
The cost of this mission is of relevance to the operation of the Department of Defense.
Yes. Point made. Mr. Harris, the witness is free to answer or to decline.
I would simply say, Mr. Harris, is that, and I think we discussed this in my last piece here, that the impact of those flying errors and the rest are within what we'd expect to be able to manage. It's not having any impact on any other commitments at this time.
Thank you, General. Time, Mr. Harris. Mr. Bazan, please, 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I want to thank you, gentlemen, for coming in and providing your expertise today. And I hope that you convey back to everyone in the Canadian Armed Forces, whether they're in theater, dealing with the ISIL threat, or they're back at home in supporting roles, and just let them know that we're very appreciative of the work that they're doing and the courage and bravery that they're showing in this incredible operation. Now, General Hood, you mentioned in your comments about the 25 original flights that we delivered over 1.6 million pounds of cargo to the Kurds and Iraqi security forces that were donated by Albania and the Czech Republic. Can you talk about what some of that military equipment is and how is it being used?
I can speak first of all, Mr. Bazan, thank you very much for your comments and opening. I'll be certainly sure to pass that on, and we appreciate the support. I can speak to specifically what was carried. I can't speak to where it's seeing action at this moment.
Of course.
We've handed this over to Iraqi security forces, so it's a varied mix of general military aid, which includes a number of munitions. So the Kurdish Peshmerga used weapons that were similar to what former Soviet republics will have used. Hence, Albania and the Czech Republic had quite a large stock of a specific caliber of bullet 7.62 instead of 5.56 that we use. Rocket-propelled grenades, so typically in the small arms regime, as well as some military aid, sleeping bags, and equipment that would prove useful to them.
Thank you. Now, and that was stuff that is incredibly handy for them. They are trained on it. They know how to use it. Easily adaptability, different than bringing in, new technology and having to train, which in some cases, like operating some of the heavier armaments would take months to learn versus put it into direct use in the fight against ISIL. Now, some of the questions that we've already had related to, the Iraqi security forces. We had a number of members of the Iraqi security forces that surrendered. A lot of them went and joined ISIL, and that's where they get a lot of their military capabilities from and command structures because of a number of generals who have been treasonously went to the other side. My understanding is that they also took with them sometimes a lot of U.S.-built equipment. There's also Russian origin equipment in the hands of ISIL. A lot of Balkans equipment that had been provided through other sources. As mentioned, the stockpile of armaments coming from Libya. Can you talk about what capabilities they do have and how that has played into their success in the region?
I can. I should probably just specify a bit the previous points because I don't want there to be a misunderstanding. Some of the senior members of ISIL are former Ba'ath Party Iraqi senior officers that would have, at the end of the Second Gulf War, would have been no longer employed in the Iraqi military as part of the de-Baathification. So while they have the experience, it's not like they were in the Iraqi security forces yesterday and walked across. Some of the equipment that the ISIL has, they brought with them from Syria, so there's some former Syrian equipment. In overrunning certain positions, they do have some Iraqi equipment which is of U.S. origin, but the technical expertise to maintain them at the level, I mean, you're starting to see those start to slowly degrade, as well as a fact of coalition airstrikes degrading that. So it's a wide range of equipment that you would have seen from tanks to artillery weapons, but they're also in technical vehicles, which would just be a typical pickup truck with a heavy weapon in the back. So it's a wide range of sourced material in that case.
So if I might add, when the ISIL kind of moved east towards Iraq, there was some U.S. equipment that was left behind in some areas, and we all saw the press talking about some of the banks that have been robbed in order to help them kind of finance their work. So that's part of those level of equipment. But there was no high-level armament left behind by the Americans, but there were some trucks and armor vehicle like Mike just mentioned.
Harris, 5 minutes, please.
Thank you. Just to look at, we've got a report here prepared by the Parliamentary Information Research Service dealing with the equipment that they believe ISIL, or it's believed from sources that ISIL has. And I noticed that they have access to, I mentioned, maybe 60 or 70 tanks, battle tanks. But they also have man pads, shoulder-launched, both U.S. and Russian-made, and anti-aircraft guns. I don't know if these so-called man pads, the portable ones, can have the range to go near our F-18s or the C-140s. But what about the anti-aircraft gun? Is there a concern about the safety of our air crews in these circumstances?
I think I mentioned earlier, Mr. Harris, that certainly no military operation is without risk. But our intelligence sources in the military typically have access to the same type of information that you're reading there. We have an understanding of both the range and capability of those weapons, and so the greatest extent possible, we would ensure that we limit the exposure of Canadian Forces assets into the effective ranges of those weapons.
Would your intelligence and capabilities for surveillance have knowledge of where these might be located, particularly the anti-aircraft guns?
Well, if we knew where they are, or if the coalition knew where they were, they're being hit. So, I mean, these are very mobile weapons, as you would expect, but certainly it is an area of concern that we take seriously, and I guarantee you it's probably near at the top of that prioritized target list that we spoke of earlier.
Mm-hmm. One of the issues that's of concerning as well, I know that the ISIS relies on foreign fighters and a heavy recruitment operation carried on in large measure out, in the Middle East, but also internationally through the use of the internet. And I know some countries have been active in looking at strategies to deal with that. And I read a couple of days ago about a conference that was held in Kuwait, where the U.S., Britain, France, Jordan, Lebanon, Egypt, Turkey, etc., were all participating. General John Allen from the U.S. was present, but we didn't participate in that. And they were trying to look at strategies for dealing with the recruiting operation by playing a role in the Internet. Is that something, whether the military is involved in that or not, is that something? Canada wasn't there, which I find a little bit surprising. Is that part of the strategy of dealing with Iraq, dealing with ISIS in Iraq as well, and whether, obviously, it's not strictly military hardware operation, but we do have CSEC at work, and I guess the question is Canada involved in that aspect of it as well?
Certainly, I mentioned previously that when we talk about lines of operation in the campaign, that's an area that is of concern. That is the radicalization and the bringing forward of these folks through various means. I'm not familiar with the conference that you're speaking to, nor can I, confirm whether Canadian participation was there or not. But I know that the coalition writ large is considering options to take advantage of certain capabilities they may have. The Canadian Forces is not in this case, Mr. Harris.
Now, I know that Canadian Foreign Affairs indicated that Canada was not present. I'm just wondering on the military side, particularly through CSEC, is that something that is being coordinated with the other coalition partners as a means of assisting in preventing, or to use the favorite phrase, to degrading the ability of ISIL to recruit foreign fighters in the manner that they have been through the Internet? It seems to me to be an area of grave concern. But my question is and you're perhaps Rear Admiral Couturier could answer this, is that something that from an intelligence response is being actively pursued?
Sir, I would have to take that question under advisement because I'm not aware, but I'll take that question under advisement and make sure that we get you the answer to that question.
And time. Thank you very much, General. Mr. Bazan.
Just clarification. We're still in the second round, are we not?
We're just completing the second round now. Mr. LaRose is next.
Okay, thank you. So, again, thank you, Mr. Chair. And I wonder, General Hood, if you could talk about the upgrades that have been done most recently in 2010 to the CF-18 Hornets, as well as the recent upgrades to the Aurora, and how that new technology and capability is assisting in theater right now.
Well, I can in very brief terms, Mr. Bazan. I'm not going to speak to the actual capabilities of the aircraft, but in both those cases, the F-18 and the technology that's in that aircraft and the CP-140 with largely Canadian technology is at the top end of capabilities that are available in theater. The Block 3 Aurora, the latest update, is a very effective overland ISR capability that is certainly envy of some allies as well. So I'd say that they are top-end capabilities.
Thank you. And just wondering if you would comment as well, any of you for that matter, on what would be happening on the ground today if the coalition had not engaged with an air combat role in the last 30 days.
Again, I wouldn't want to hypothesize. I wouldn't want to hypothesize too far, but without anything to blunt that advance, which we've seen the airstrikes be quite effective at that, I could imagine they'd be much closer to reaching their objectives.
So just to add to that, the Baghdad element is key to the future of Iraq. And one of the things they're doing is from Iraqi Defense Forces, is they're concentrating their main capabilities here in that region in order to protect what they see is their vital ground. So without us going in there, one can only imagine where Baghdad would be today.
Okay, so the battle that the airstrikes that we just delivered over the weekend on Sunday was in defense of positions around Fallujah. So Peshmerga, or not Peshmerga, the ISIL terrorists are trying to get into that area and push towards Baghdad, and it's because of air support that the Iraqi security forces have been able to push them back.
So the element here is that this is all part of the overall campaign plan to make sure that Baghdad is not being seized, and the fact that they were using those construction equipment to kind of get rid of some of the dam and affect the water allocation within the region certainly affected the effectiveness of the troops on the ground.
The news, of course, are always reporting on what is happening in Kobani, of course, in Syria, which is outside of our area of engagement, and what's happening around Baghdad. But is the Royal Canadian Air Force engaged as well in surveillance and setting up fighter jets in northern Iraq in support of the Peshmerga forces up in the north?
So our area of operations is Iraq writ large. So if a target was to come up that was in Mosul, for example, which is in the region that you speak of, and it was assigned to us, it met our collateral damage estimate and was approved, it would be struck. So there are no limits on the use of Canadian assets within Iraq.
Okay, and of course Canada gleaned a lot of expertise and information from both Libya and Afghanistan. How is those lessons learned being applied to what we're doing in this coalition battle in Iraq?
Well, we've spoken earlier answering Mr. Chizu's question with respect to the professionalism of the Royal Canadian Air Force in this case, and lessons we've learned in previous operations at all levels, tactical, operational, and strategic, are always rolled in to the subsequent training activity and then operations that we do. So I wouldn't be able to pull out a specific one, but I'm confident in saying that the lessons learned process that we've spoke about previously here is very active. So all of the lessons that we learned previously would be rolled in for today.
Okay. Can you talk about how our contribution in this coalition and our fight against ISIL compares to, say, the contribution that we made in the conflict in Libya?
Well, I don't think any two coalitions are the same, although there's some of the same actors in both. Our contribution is not dissimilar, although you recall we had Royal Canadian Navy ships in the vicinity with a Sea King as well. So it's similar in size and scope. Our CP-140, we've increased the size of that contribution, and in fact, the Block 3 aircraft is now completely operational, so we're bringing even more to effect to bear in this campaign than we were able to in Libya, for example.
Thank you, General. Monsieur Larose, 5 minutes, s'il vous plaît.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. There's been a lot of talk about traditional targets, but I'd like to talk about non-traditional targets. I think some citizens are concerned about the fact that here in Canada, there are radical ideas on the internet, and people could potentially have military intentions through the internet. So earlier you mentioned the Department of Public Safety, and I'd like to know what you've been discussing with them and how it's going. You have a very traditional map up here on the screen, but we are facing a non-traditional enemy, which is targeting our children at home and trying to create local cells in Canada. So in your strategy, have you talked about particular non-traditional targets in Canada? And has there been action taken to limit their access to particular equipment? Concretely, what are you doing on this subject? In the armed forces, we do have defensive capabilities to fight against cyber issues, cyber threats. And those are resources dedicated to dealing with internet issues within the Department of Defense. Otherwise, it's essentially the Public Safety Department that deals with offensive capacities. But I'm not in the best position to answer that question. I do know that it is an issue that concerns people here in Canada, but for us at Defense, we really deal with defensive capability. Then there's also the domestic versus international issue, and we want to act clearly internationally. Yes, but you're clearly working on the source of this complex issue. Now, does the coalition have capacity? Do the Americans have capacity to work on this? Well, it's possible that if ISIL had a particular headquarters, for the people conducting these actions on the internet, well, then that could become a potential target. But as you said, that would be the same as a military target, an ISIL military target. So, yes, if there were to be a valid target, then the Canadian Armed Forces or the Royal Air Force could potentially attack that. Well, targets, by their nature, and by their location, do have an influence on military action. So yes, if there were a headquarters, then we could target it and attack it, because that could be done in the context of a military conflict. So the internet actually feeds some of these people. It gives them media content and ideas, and feeds them ideology. So it seems to me that this should be a priority. Of course, I understand that in Canada our position is a defensive one, but given all of the recent events that have happened, we have become a target. So it seems to me that this should be a priority. Well, if you'll allow me, earlier we were talking about General Allen with Mr. Harris, and he is another player in the fight against ISIL. It doesn't play a strictly military role, but he looks at how we could meet some of the challenges that you mentioned, not only from a military point of view, but from a broad government point of view. So we look at financing, internet, and the ways that these people propagate messages on the internet, not only in Canada but around the world. So we play a role not only with CENTCOM or with on the military side, but the General also works with the Department of State in the U.S., and they do study the whole, all of the aspects of that complex issue. I think that, I mean, I have been somewhat reassured by your answer, but I think everyone would be more reassured if we could really be told that this is a priority and to see what the concrete measures are that have been taken. As I explained, and as General Hood explained, we at the Armed Forces only have a defensive capacity in that area. Thank you.
General Hood, Admiral Couturier, Colonel Gendron, for your contributions today. I think I speak on behalf of all members of the committee in that we hope to see you again with regular updates over the coming months. But thank you certainly for your appearance before us today. Point of order, Ms. Murray.
Mr. Chair, in terms of regular updates, may I request or suggest that the committee organize weekly briefings and open them up to other members of Parliament so all of our colleagues can benefit from the kind of update, and their concerns for our armed force members can also be expressed and hopefully assuaged by senior members of the Canadian Armed Forces.
Thank you. I recognize your request. We can perhaps talk about that during committee business on Thursday. But for now, thank you again, gentlemen. This meeting is adjourned.